Welcome, everyone. Today, we are going to unpack the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. We will look under the hood to understand the core features, architectural layers, and foundational objects that make up Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, and more. Let's get started. Let's start by looking at the big picture. Microsoft 365 is much more than just Word or Excel. It is a highly integrated, cloud-connected ecosystem. To truly master M365 administration, you must understand its 5-layer architecture. At the base, we have the identity layer, powered by Microsoft Entra ID, which verifies who is accessing the system. Above that is the service layer, housing the core collaborative tools like Exchange Online, SharePoint, and Teams. Next is the data layer, where Microsoft Graph maps the relationships between users and their content. Sitting on top is the intelligence layer, driven by Copilot and AI agents. Finally, wrapping around all of this is the security and compliance layer, utilizing tools like Microsoft Defender and Purview. Why does this matter? Because as an administrator, an action you take in one layer like adjusting a security policy ripples through the entire ecosystem. You aren't just managing apps, you are managing an interconnected enterprise environment. Take a look at this architectural flow. At the very bottom, driving access, is the identity layer represented by Microsoft Entra ID. It flows directly into our service layer, the tools your users interact with daily, like Teams and Exchange. Notice how the service layer feeds into the data layer, Microsoft Graph. Graph is the connective tissue that maps out how data relates to users. That data then fuels the intelligence layer at the top, enabling AI like Copilot to function. Now, look at the dotted lines from the security and compliance layer. It doesn't just sit in one place. It wraps around and governs both the identity and service layers, ensuring that data is protected at rest and in transit. Building on our architectural overview, we dive into the foundational layer, identity and access management. In Microsoft 365, every interaction starts with Microsoft Entra ID. The absolute core objects here are users and groups. A user represents an individual identity, complete with credentials and metadata like their department or job title. However, assigning permissions user by user is highly inefficient. That is why we use groups. We have security groups strictly for access control, and we have Microsoft 365 groups, which are powerful collaborative objects. When you create an M365 group, you aren't just creating a security boundary, you are instantly provisioning a shared Outlook mailbox, a group calendar, a SharePoint document library, and a planner board. By mastering these objects and utilizing role-based access control or RBCU, ensure that users have exactly the right level of access, adhering to the principle of least privilege. This diagram illustrates the object hierarchy within Microsoft Entra ID. From the main directory, we branch into user objects and group objects. Follow the path from group objects down to Microsoft 365 groups. Notice how it branches out into multiple distinct resources. Unlike standard security groups, which just govern access, an M365 group acts as a deployment trigger. It automatically spins up a shared mailbox, a SharePoint site, and a planner board. This visual perfectly captures how a single identity object in M365 serves as the key to unlocking a fully integrated collaborative workspace. Now we move into the service layer, starting with Exchange Online. Exchange is the communication backbone of Microsoft 365. While you might just think of email, as an admin, you must understand the specific objects within Exchange. You have user mailboxes, which require a license and are tied to a specific person. But for organizational efficiency, we rely heavily on shared mailboxes and resource mailboxes. A shared mailbox like support@yourcompany.com allows multiple team members to read and reply from one address without needing a dedicated license. Resource mailboxes represent physical assets, like conference rooms or projectors, and contain auto-attendant logic to accept or decline calendar bookings based on availability. Understanding how to deploy and secure these specific objects through the Exchange Admin Center ensures smooth, compliant organizational communication. Here we see the breakdown of Exchange Online objects. On the left, user mailboxes require a license and tie directly to a user's access. In the middle, shared mailboxes also connect to user access, but notice their unlicensed multiple users funnel into this one object. On the right, resource mailboxes bypass human intervention completely by utilizing auto-accept and decline logic for scheduling. Finally, we have distribution lists, which don't store data at all, but merely route messages to a predefined list of users. This structure shows how Exchange manages varying business needs efficiently. Next, let's explore where your organization's data actually lives: SharePoint Online and OneDrive. While they share the same underlying architecture, their use cases are distinct. OneDrive is for personal work files. Each user typically gets 1 terabyte of space. SharePoint is the engine for shared organizational content. The core objects in SharePoint are sites, document libraries, and lists. You provision communication sites to broadcast news to the whole company, and team sites for granular, day-to-day group collaboration. When a user uploads a file to a document library, it isn't just dropped on a hard drive. It is chunked into abstracted code, heavily encrypted, and distributed across Azure SQL databases. This makes SharePoint incredibly resilient. If a server fails, your data remains secure and accessible. Understanding this hierarchy from site to library to folder to item is crucial for managing data lifecycles and permissions. Let's trace the data hierarchy in SharePoint. Starting at the top, SharePoint splits into team sites for collaboration and communication sites for broadcasting. Following the team site path, the structure breaks down into document libraries for files and lists for structured data. Inside a document library, you have folders and metadata that organize the files. The most critical part of this diagram is the final node. Files are ultimately broken down and stored as encrypted chunks in Azure SQL databases, ensuring high availability, deep security, and real-time co-authoring capabilities. Now we bring communication and content together with Microsoft Teams, the ultimate collaboration hub. Teams is uniquely designed because it is essentially a unified wrapper for other M365 services. When you create a team, you are actually leveraging an underlying Microsoft 365 group. Inside a team, the core objects are channels, which organize conversations by topic. As an admin, you must understand the nuances of these channels. Standard channels are open to the team. Private channels restrict access to a subset of members and spin up a separate SharePoint site for security. And shared channels allow collaboration across different organizations. It's critical to realize that Teams does not store files itself. When a user drops a file into a Teams channel, it is instantly routed to the associated SharePoint document library. Knowing this integration is essential for troubleshooting missing files or configuring data loss prevention policies. This diagram reveals the true architecture of Microsoft Teams. A team is divided into channels. Here we see a standard channel and a private channel. The standard channel contains persistent chat and a Files tab. Follow the dotted line from the Files tab. It points directly to the connected SharePoint document library. Teams is just the interface. SharePoint is the engine. Now look at the private channel. Because it requires restricted access, it bypasses the main library and connects to its own dedicated secure SharePoint site. This prevents unauthorized members of the broader team from accessing confidential files. With our services deployed, we must protect them. This brings us to the security and compliance layer, heavily driven by Microsoft Defender XDR and Microsoft Purview. The foundational philosophy here is zero trust, assume breach, verify explicitly, and enforce least privilege. Defender is your shield against active threats. It scans Exchange for phishing links and SharePoint for malware. Purview is your data governor. The core objects in Purview are sensitivity labels and data loss prevention, or DLP, policies. A sensitivity label is incredibly powerful because it travels with the data object. If you apply a confidential label to a Word document in SharePoint, that file is encrypted. If a user downloads it to a USB drive and takes it home, they still cannot open it without authenticating against Enter ID. This ensures your data remains secure, regardless of where the physical file travels. This visual splits our defensive posture into 2 streams. On the top, active threats like phishing or malware are intercepted by Microsoft Defender, which utilizes features like safe links and safe attachments to sanitize traffic before it hits the user. On the bottom, corporate data is governed by Microsoft Purview. Purview applies sensitivity labels and DLP policies to your files. The critical takeaway is the final node. Sensitivity labels result in persistent encryption. The security is embedded into the file object itself, rather than just the network perimeter, perfectly illustrating modern zero-trust architecture. Finally, we reach the data and intelligence layers. The unsung hero of Microsoft 365 is the Microsoft Graph. Graph is the API fabric that maps the relationships between every object we've discussed today. It knows who you report to, which SharePoint sites you frequent, and what Teams meetings you attended. When you introduce Microsoft 365 Copilot, Graph provides the context. Copilot uses large language models to generate responses, but an LLM alone isn't enough. When a user asks Copilot to summarize my project, the orchestration engine uses the semantic index in Graph to ground the prompt. It fetches the exact emails, chats, and documents relevant to that user. The most critical point for admins to understand is that Copilot honors all existing permissions. It cannot hallucinate its way into a restricted HR SharePoint site. It strictly adheres to Enter ID access control lists, ensuring AI empowers your users without compromising security. Let's walk through the lifecycle of a Copilot prompt. The user submits a prompt, which enters the Copilot orchestration engine. Instead of going straight to the AI, it dips down into Microsoft Graph and the semantic index to gather contextual data. Immediately, it hits the permission check node. This is vital. Data the user cannot access is stripped away. The remaining, authorized data forms the grounded context. Only then is this rich, secure context sent to the large language model, which processes it and delivers a secure AI response back to the user. Security is baked into the very workflow of the AI. Let's tie all these core objects together with a highly important real-world use case, provisioning a secure workspace for a confidential project launch. Your project management office requests a space for Project Alpha. Instead of manually building a file share and an email list, you, the admin, simply create a single Microsoft 365 group in the admin center. Immediately, Enter ID establishes the group identity. Exchange Online spins up a shared calendar and inbox. SharePoint provisions a secure document library. Next, you apply a purview sensitivity label called Highly Confidential directly to the group. This ensures no external guests can be invited and all files uploaded are automatically encrypted. Your users interface with all of this through Microsoft Teams. When the project manager asks Copilot to draft a status update, Copilot seamlessly reads the encrypted SharePoint files and Exchange emails via Microsoft Graph, generating a perfect summary while strictly enforcing the zero trust boundaries you set up. You have achieved maximum productivity with absolute security. This final diagram demonstrates the elegance of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem in action. It starts with a single action, create M365 group. This branches simultaneously into creating the Enter ID identity, the Exchange inbox, and the SharePoint site. We then apply a purview sensitivity label to the identity, securing the perimeter. All of these backend objects converge into the user-facing Microsoft Teams interface. Because everything is structurally unified and secured at the foundation, we can confidently funnel this data into secure Copilot analysis via Graph at the very end. The ecosystem works as one cohesive unit.